Welcome back to another episode of Management Unfiltered. I am your co-host, Kirk Teachout.
And I'm the other co-host, Zach Shelley. And I think we nailed this. Today, we are going to talk about how to develop your leadership style. We were just talking about previous episodes that we recorded, guys. You're going to hear us kind of spoof on these intros, but that's what's most fun because it's completely unfiltered. We're not editing that stuff out. We're just having fun with this. We're here to educate. We're here to learn. And one of the biggest things is Kirk and I had some planning meetings talking about like, hey, what are we going to talk about on these podcasts? And there's so many different things that we can talk about, but like one of the big ones is how to develop your leadership style. Like, what are the things in our careers that we've learned that have developed to where we're at now? And it's not always just a person. It's not always just a course. We're going to talk about some books. We are going to talk about courses. We're going to talk about people, but we're also going to just talk about lessons that have been learned throughout the years. Because a lot of times we develop these skills by experiences. So, Kirk, I'm going to kind of hand the mic back over to you. And I think this is going to be a good intro because you had, something you're like, oh, I know what I'm going to talk about right away. So let's just dive right into it.
Yeah, for sure. So I appreciate that because, yeah, this is something I'm itching to dive into. One of the first things that I dive in with all of my clients is these three books. So the first thing is The Go-Giver by Bob Berg. It's about servant leadership, which I love. It's that honestly, I mean, Jesus was the ultimate servant leader, right? But it was like so now these guys have put it into a real world scenario with business and different things. It's in parable form, which is really neat in business, of this go-getter that's in New York, and he has to go through and actually learn how to shift his mindset from being a go-getter to a go-giver and see how value comes back ultimately when you give value. Right. But that's the first one. Right. So it's mainly mindset shift. The second one is extreme ownership, which everybody loves a good war book. Oh man, it's so good. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. Leif was shot by a sniper, so he talks like this, but it's so good. But it's about taking extreme ownership as a leader and seeing what you did wrong and how you can do better, not coming down on somebody, which is so cool. And I love that. So it's mindset shift, take extreme ownership and how you can serve versus have somebody and dictate to them. Then the third one is the compound effect, which is very similar to Atomic Habits by James Clear, but it's about small, consistent, just changes over time that really make a massive exponential difference. So you've got the mindset shift, you've got the concrete, like, hey, I need to do this, and how can I do better for you, not how can you do better for me, into now being consistent with all of that. It really makes a massive difference, and it has really shaped my leadership style for sure.
Yeah. I think I'm going to bounce off you because one we share. So my third book, I'll start with my third just because it's the one we share, which is Extreme Ownership. And there's so many examples in that because you listen to Jocko like putting these things through with these like high level COOs, CFOs, like, and these companies are crashing and Jocko's like, you need to get in with the board and tell them you messed up. And it's you. And they're like, I'm going to get fired. And he goes, maybe you will, but you're going to learn a really hard lesson. And like Jocko's so like genuine and 100% like, this is on you and it's on nobody else. And if you dodge it, like maybe you'll skip through this, but the company's going to be no better for it. And you'll end up losing your job no matter what. But like 90% of the case studies that he presents in that book, they're like, Jocko, they didn't fire me. They gave me an opportunity to do better because I owned everything. Nobody expects you to do that. And I think that's the biggest thing like Kirk and I share probably to the T is the concept of value and like giving and trying to make as much as we can to somebody actually getting something out of what we're trying to do. So that's like my first / third book. My number one book that I recommend everybody read is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown, and she is just a phenomenal writer. For one, it's one that I read when I came into dental practice management out of the dental lab world, and it outlines 4 keys. So it's rumbling with vulnerability, which vulnerability is like super hard for all of us just as human beings. And it really dives into the fundamentals behind like what it means to be vulnerable, how to have that with other people, and then actually how to extract that out of somebody else to get them to open up with you, which you end up in turn learning so much about other people. It also talks about braving trust. living into values, and developing resilience. So like there's so many like good keys. Kirk, have you read that book?
Yeah, no, it's great. It's on my list. It's just somewhere.
And then that's the saying. Like I've said it on a bunch of other podcasts. I've said it in my group a bunch. Like clear is kind. That came from Brené Brown. Like all the time, clear is kind. And the more clear you are, like even if it's a hard conversation, you're being kind to that person. If you're being unclear, it's unkind. So just remember that. Like as you go through conversations, like clarity is key. And then the third one is actually, I think Kirk, you recommended this to me, which was the coffee bean. And the coffee bean is such a good book. And I'm going to kind of ruin it, some of it for you guys, but it's like a 45-minute read. It's one of the easiest books you will ever read in your life. And I've had so many people at the office read it. And I actually recently gave it to two people to read that were bickering. And I've used this as one to really kind of develop other people's mindset and perspective of like what's going on around them and what they're allowing in their life. Because they talk about like, if you put an egg in hot water, what happens to the egg? And we always talk about like egg gets hard. And it's like, okay, so if we put a carrot in hot water, what happens? The carrot gets soft. Well, the whole premise of this book is talking about what happens when you put coffee in water. Well, the coffee actually changes the water. And it's talking about like you can either allow the environments around you to change you, or you can be the coffee bean and actually change the environment and make it better. And coffee is awesome. So I love coffee and it makes everybody's day better. So what can go wrong with reading a book about coffee bean? And Kirk's holding up his pink Stanley right now, which is awesome. It was a Father's Day gift. If you guys ever want to give something to Kirk or send it to him, pink is his color. I'm going to challenge you when you speak at ADOM to wear pink.
Oh gosh.
All jokes aside, Coffee Bean is also a really, really good book. So there's 6 practical books, guys, right there that in the first 7 minutes of this podcast that you can use to develop your leadership style. Books are a great way, but it's how you. I think this is the kind of the next step, and Kirk push the conversation a different way if you disagree. But application is kind of really key with developing your leadership style because we're talking about these books, but like, what are we actually doing with them? Like, we can learn these core fundamentals and values and ways to be effective as a leader, but like, if we don't do anything with it, like there's zero value to that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think I think too, like, we tend to sit down and think like, oh, I need to write or I need to read this book or I need to listen to this podcast and implement everything in it, right? But I think if you can simply continuously read and listen to things, situations will come up all the time where you're like, this is going to help me so much in that situation, right? Because it's a lot of leadership books are fairly objective and just kind of vague of like concepts. And so when you're coming into it of like, oh wow, yes, like what you were saying with the COO and the CEO, right, with Jocko Willink. So that is the first thing that I have practice owners do when we have a meeting with the practice, if they really don't have a handle on their team, is I have them go into the team and say this: I am sorry I haven't been the leader that I needed to be for you, but that's going to change today. But now I'm working towards being the leader you need. And so that way they take ownership, they're apologizing for it in a genuine manner. And it allows them to not just like, oh, the next time they come down on somebody, like, where'd that come from? Like, no, they apologize. Here's the new standard, and they know where to go from it. Right. But if you're just kind of like reading some things and kind of picking and choosing, it's hard to implement sometimes, which is why like a lot of people right now that I'm talking to are reading the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell, another book that I read every single year. And it's because I go through the whole book just back to back to back, just so that way I can have that permeation. But then I go through one chapter at a time a week. So, like, the first law is the law of the lid. Like, okay, well, I am not going to be any more effective than my lid of leadership, right? So, if I'm a 5 out of 10, people beside me are never going to be above that. And if they do, then you're not effective and they leave, right? So, how can you raise your lid of leadership to grow and get better? And then, how can I do that this week? Okay, and then the next week I go to the second law and I'm like, okay, how can I implement that? So there's ways to do it, but I think if you have that continuous effort, right, of just reading something, then you're going to naturally have things that come up like, okay, yeah, this is how I can help or, do that.
It's kind of interesting. It's not the same thing that you do, but it's something that tactic that I've done that is a constant reminder of fundamentals of like things that I need to remember to do. And it's come from books. It's come from things I've learned. It's I think you saw some of it in my office, Kirk, when you're at the practice on my glass wall. I have some things that say up there like be the leader others want to follow. And like I look at that all day. Another one is do what's best for the patient, do what's best for the practice, do the right thing for the right reasons. I have one that says we will miss you. I learned that from the book Traction from John Wickman. And it's a whole story about the lady. She's complaining about Southwest Airlines not having a business class, and the CEO literally writes a letter back to her, Miss So and So, this is CEO of Southwest. We will miss you. Signed, the CEO of Southwest. And he explained, he's like, you're not our right client. We've talked about this in other situations. We can talk about the patients, but like we can also talk with our team. Like sometimes we have to sit with the fact of saying, as a good leader, it is no longer good for my team to have this person in the practice. And I need to step as a good leader and say, hey, we're going to miss you, but you're not a good fit. And we might not miss them if they're that bad, but it's the concept behind it. And there's other things that I have quotes from multiple leaders that I respect of, failure starts with leadership, and it's all the whole mindset of taking ownership. So I've taken bits and pieces that I can look at daily that are just reminders when I'm in kind of in the zone in the game, leading the practice, because there's so many factors in dentistry. There's so many things that come up every single day. We got what call outs, Kirk. We've got doctors that are sick, schedules that fall apart, patients that are complaining, phones ringing off the hook, insurance portals down, fighting patients to pay their bills, denials, appeals. I mean, I can go on and on of the things that we deal with every single day. That's just like, oh, like I'm so frustrated that we lose focus. And I think that's one thing that we can kind of be that caveat. Like, how do we maintain our leadership and develop our leadership style in the chaos, right? How do you stay grounded?
I watch The Office every night. That's how I stay grounded.
I, That's one of my favorite shows. I hope that everybody's listening, docs and OMs. If you want some encouragement that you're a great leader, watch The Office. Michael Scott will give you so much encouragement of what not to do as a leader.
Well, but see, that's kind of the funny part, right? Is like I have been watching The Office since I was in college, like for so long. And the my wife would not watch it with me, right? Like there's like kind of like this running joke, right? It's like, true Office fans will ask, well, do you watch The Office, not have you watched The Office, right? Meaning it's a continual watching, which right, because I do all the time. I think I'm on maybe the eighth time all the way through. I'm in season 8 right now. So I mean, it's crazy, but it's so good. But it wasn't until we bought The Office, like our practice, that we started watching The Office, and my wife started watching it with me, and she was like, "Oh my goodness, this is what's happening in the practice right now." Just exaggerated, right? And she became a fan because it's so ridiculous that it's true. Like it's so true, but it at least has that comedic valor to it that it's like, okay, well, if Michael Scott can get through it, then I can get through it. All jokes aside, how do we lead amidst the chaos?
But not only lead, but like how do we continue to develop through that, right? And I think something that's just kind of in my brain, and Kirk, I think we're a lot alike, and maybe I can speak for you on this. Like you and I are always looking for the next thing, and it's not like the next business deal, like the next thing we can learn. Like what can we learn from each other? When Kirk and I first met, we met way back in 2024 in the great city of Salt Lake City, Utah. So guys, Kirk and I have been friends for less than a year, but from day one, I feel like Kirk and I kind of just hit it off and just started chatting and talking and joking. I'm like, dude, did we just become best friends? Like, it was just kind of one of those things. Like, we really connected, but our mindsets were a lot alike. And one thing that Kirk and I are always talking to, I feel like, is like, what are we learning? What are we trying to gain out of something? How can we apply these things? And I think that's in the chaos. I think that's what the next thing is to develop your leadership style, is having that mindset of like, okay, what can I gain from this situation, this bad situation? What can I learn from it? How can I move forward from it and be better off and teach my team how to get through that. So I think it's in developing your leadership style, it is like almost a mindset. Like when you're getting in there of like, you have to be geared towards like, I know today's going to suck, but depending on how I handle it, depends on how my team's going to take it and handle it and move forward from it. But then you're actually going to learn from your team members through these situations.
And patience a lot of times. Like, I mean, golly, we learn so much from patience, right? And you know, I have it on both sides because, you know, I have it from my wife who's coming home talking about our practice, and then I have it from the clients that are also, you know, meeting with me, you know, every other week. And but even though it's kind of separated that way, I always have two touch points every week where on Mondays I always ask, and sometimes I'll ask you this too, what's your focus for this week? One focus, right? Not anything broad. Is like, not what is your focus, what is one focus you have this week?
I'm pretty sure I've responded, keep my head above water.
Yes, you have, and sometimes you have those weeks, right?
Yeah.
But and I know, like, the other day in the group, you posted like, is Mondays like chaos or like strategic or whatever it is, and I was like, yeah, you know, sometimes they are. It just is. You wake up and 3 people have called in. You're like, "Oh, great, cool." But I start with what's one focus for this week, and then on Fridays I send out another text saying, "What were the wins from this week?" So we have a focus, but then reflection, right? Because we tend to lack taking inventory of our accomplishments, even if they're small. Yeah, you know, we talk about, and I mean, we can have a whole episode on burnout, but we talk about how burnout is so prevalent in the dental field. Sounds good. But it's so prevalent, and it's mainly because, like, we focus on the stuff that we dread, right? The things that just constantly go wrong and the problems. But if we can now reflect on the things that went right? Then it gets a lot easier and you're like, okay, like we at least did something right. We're not just defeated all the time, which is why, like, in the morning huddles, we start with, how's everybody's, night last night? Great. What went well yesterday? What went well? Not what can we do better? What went well?
Yeah. What worked?
Yeah. And sure, we get into the nitty-gritty of like, yeah, we could have done this better, but what went well? And that's the first thing we do.
Just as our culture, especially in the United States, like we do hyper focus on the wrong. Like when we're cruising and coasting and things are good, like we don't touch anything, and that's not actually really a good thing, especially in dentistry. Like if you're doing well and you're not touching anything, it's just a matter of time till you crash, right? Like you have to have your hands on the controls and still kind of pull in that altitude if you want to climb and grow. So that's a super valid point. I kind of want to touch. Like I had a friend come in today, and I've known him for about 3 years. He's actually a retired AHL hockey player, like just stud of a dude. I love playing hockey, and that's kind of how like we connected. And him and his wife came in, and I was chatting with them, and the first thing he said, he's like, "Dude, you told me you're in dental, but like I didn't realize." Like, he's like, "Wow, this is awesome. Like this place is beautiful." And I was like, "Thanks, man." I said, "Really appreciate that." And you're talking about like celebrating wins, and like these are things that we need to do with our team in order to get them engaged and want to grow too. And this is a big part of like developing your style, is being open and telling good and bad, but the good things we don't always hear, like you said, Kirk. Like we're really good at pushing on the negatives. But he sent me a text after he left, and it was untriggered. And he just said, "Zach, what a blessing to connect today. We had an extraordinary first visit, very professionally run. One of the best experiences I've had at a dentist's office in all my years traveling the nation." Now, if you get to know this guy, his name's Gary Steffes. He is amazing. He trains NHL hockey teams all over the country, and so he sees all their training programs, all their doctors, and all that. And so to hear that from him is actually like quite incredible. And that's something I went right back to the docs and was like, "Hey, this is what he just sent me on the visit he just had with you," and that's just going to make them want to get better and better.
Yeah, and when you can read, like, like at the end of our morning huddles, we read all the 5-star reviews from the night before, right? And, point out people's names when they have them in there, and, you know, to be able to really focus on those wins, as leaders, when you're developing that leadership style, you've got to be able to celebrate the wins, but also, be comfortable with the hard conversations. But man, yeah, the I want to move on a little bit to maybe like when you're developing this leadership style of kind of the segue of what I just touched on here at the end, right? Was something we've talked about at your office actually was getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. You know, an office manager, a practice owner, you've got to have thick skin. And it's not, oh man, I'm just a failure. No, your threshold just changes over time. Right? And I think the perfect example was, during COVID, everybody who had been through any crazy tragedy was putting out a program of like, hey, I'm doing this webinar like to help everybody get through this. Like this is what we're doing in crisis mode. And so I hopped on one of those, and he was just like, look, just remember you have survived 100% the failures you've ever had. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. Right. And he was just like, think about, he was like, I was in the 2008, market crash. I was a developer and I was building houses, and like I was doing 400 homes a month and went to nothing. And he was just like, now going through this, it's, it's still a crisis, but I am much more conditioned to it than I was the first time I went through it. Right. And so I thought about that where, we went through COVID, and I was just thinking like, yes, we've survived 100% of the things we've ever been through. We can get through this. We got through it. 6 months later, ransomware shut down our office for 3 weeks. Tens of thousands of dollars that we had to pay, not only in ransom, but it also in, new computers, new systems, all sorts of stuff. Thankfully, there was nothing stolen, but still yet when you go through that, I we had an employee come up at the time, like we couldn't get into our computers in the morning, and she was like, oh, you think we'll be up by the afternoon? I'm like, no. No, but it was that threshold had changed, right? Of, oh crap, panic mode, where we went through COVID of we don't know what's going on, to, hey, we've got this. We already went through something that nobody's ever done and nobody's ever gone through. We can get through this. So in having that comfortability with being uncomfortable, not only in that, but also in the decisions you make, knowing that it may be a wrong one, but owning it, and then also having the tough conversations with people quickly, whether it's your team or your patients.
Yeah, I think that's a super valuable point that a lot of people, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that never learn that, or they make the decisions and they don't own it. And I'm going to go bold here and maybe piss off some doctors, but hey, it's Management Unfiltered, right? Doctors, you're really good about going back on what you say. And I'm going to say it in a specific way. I hear so many times that our office managers talk to the doc and they'd agree on something, and then that assistant or that hygienist or that patient comes and talks directly to the doctor, and you fold and make a different decision without telling your own. And it happens so many times. I see it through my group all the time where, you know, you don't own that decision. So docs, if you are working alongside your OM, like, you have to also be comfortable with the decisions you make. And when you've given your office manager the empowerment or given a decision, you need to stand true with that. But also the OM, you have to follow through with what you say you're going to do. So it is a breakdown in leadership period. But there's just been so many times I've seen that come through the group, and I'm like, oh, these are so easy if you guys would communicate with each other, um, and move forward with that.
To your point, and to the doctor's defense,
I love it. Here we go.
that is a leadership issue,
Oh yeah, for sure.
because anyone, even the OM, can do that. And be, because it's hard when you are confronted. I don't think my wife is listening to this. I said that on the last one. but but when we were about to get married, we went through premarital counseling, and when we took our tests, like both of us rated the worst on conflict resolution, right? Nobody likes conflict, right? Nobody. And so when you finally get that pushback, it's so difficult, but you gotta have accountability and stand your ground and own that decision, like you were saying. But but too, like when you're between like an OM and a practice owner, for instance, this is something that I really have learned not only in marriage and have taught others about, but I took it from our premarital counseling actually. So this is a perfect segue.
Now, premarital counseling unfiltered. We're on a new podcast.
So what we were talking about in that premarital counseling, we were talking about how, or the preacher was telling us like, hey, when you guys are fighting, most of the time, you're fighting to win the argument,
Yeah, 100%.
just to win the argument, not actually because you're right? um, and we're trying to come to a compromise. So, you know, something he was just like, look, if it's you know, a 2 out of 10 of importance for you, why are you fighting over that? Why are you trying to win that argument when it's not even important to you? But it's an 8 out of 10 in her eyes, right? And the same thing is like, if it's a 2 out of 10 for you, but it's a 10 out of 10 for him, like, why are you guys fighting about it? Come to a compromise, chill out. It's okay. You shouldn't fight just to win the argument. And so I've started doing that a lot early on in our marriage where, it was just like, this doesn't matter to me. Go ahead and do it. you know but there was a time where my wife, and a lot of the female listeners will disagree with me on this and take my wife's side, but where she wanted our 3 or 4 year old son to wear a bubble still, and I was like, no. 10 out of 10 of importance for me. 2 years old is what we agreed on, no more. Right? And she was like, but it's so cute. I'm like, I don't care. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. I'm going to fight for this. Right? But if you can come as a leader, now come back.
Yep, rein it back in. I'm reeling you back in, Kirk.
Yeah. So if you can come back in as a leader and see like the importance of taking ownership when you have made a decision, and maybe you do feel like, oh, okay, maybe I was wrong. Taking ownership again and seeing it from somebody else's side and being empathetic in that way, then you're going to develop a much better, well-rounded and effective leadership style than you would otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. I can agree with that for sure.
So it's not always the doctor's fault. Just to point that out.
No, not always the doctor's fault. I'm just calling you out in those certain situations. But I think the other thing too is one of the biggest things I've learned, and I know that my teams appreciate it just because they vocalized it to me, is you don't always have to implement what people suggest or what they try to input. But if you have an ability to listen and just hear what your team is saying, it moves mountains when it comes to leadership and people actually buying in, which was another thing I talked about in my group recently, is like, how do you create buy-in with your team? Listening to them, because there are some things that I've been through the years. I'm like, that's a great idea, and like I use it. I'm like, hey, that was a really good idea. Like let's work on this and let's try and develop this a little bit more. Might be something like a shallow idea that they really didn't think about a whole lot. They just kind of spurted it out, but you're like, no, let's run with this. And like that really gets them excited because like, oh, you actually care like what I say, and then it can completely change the mindset of people feeling comfortable to be bold, because that's like another thing in being a leader, like not just being comfortable with uncomfortable, but like comfortable with being bold and being the person that stands up. No, nope, we're not doing that, but doing it in a way that it's emotionally intelligent, right? Because there's a lot of things that we struggle with, that we get emotionally in the wrong way. We get angry or we get upset, and we let those emotions show, and then you don't get that following. So it's that big balance between all these factors coming through that I will say, and Kirk, I know you'll agree with me on this one, is like these aren't skills and the things that you'll develop overnight. Like these are things over years. And when Kirk was first talking about, reading a book and implementing all these things, like I literally wrote a course, and at the end of the course for our team, it said, I want you to do nothing today. But what I want you to do is ask a single question. And it's like, so you take one thing and master that of what you're learning. and then move on and start adding things. But like we're really good at like just like, okay, I read the book, now let's implement 57 rules that I just learned about leadership. And it's like wrong. Like, why don't you start on number one and see how it works and see how you develop and then go with number two. But then you still have to be strong with number one. And like once we're implementing other parts of our leadership and developing our parts of leadership, it doesn't mean that that other part goes away. And I think that's what really separates those rock star leaders from the ones that are just like, kind of mediocre.
Yeah, the ones that learn from their mistakes, of which we both have many.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Kirk, I think this was a really well-rounded conversation on developing your leadership style. I think this is a perfect point to sign off and say, see you guys later.
I agree. I agree. We could go on all night, I feel
Yeah.
like, with
Yeah.
this
There,
topic, but
there
I
might be
think
a
that was
part
good.
two to that. Well, guys, it's been a pleasure. I'm Zach Shelley.
And I'm Kirk Teachout. And this has been Management Unfiltered. Make sure to leave a 5-star review below. Give us some comments in the comments section as well about what you want to hear. And we hope to hear from you soon.
Yes, subscribe and share, guys. Take it easy.